Montana Territory, August 1872. The sun was brutal overhead when Evangeline Voss stumbled and dropped to her knees in the dry dust, her bonnet half torn, boots blistered through, and her lips cracked from thirst. The stagecoach had broken an axle 2 days ago east of Fort Benton, and she'd walked west ever since, holding fast to a letter in her pocket and a name she barely knew. Her dress, once a hopeful blue, was now the color of ash. She looked up, breath ragged, and saw nothing but open plains, scattered sage, and a hawk circling high above. Then came the sound steady hoofbeats, low and sure. She turned her head, vision blurry, and saw him riding toward her. A man on a deep brown horse, broad-shouldered, lean, dust on his hat and worry in his eyes. He pulled up beside her and swung down fast. "Ma'am? Are you hurt?" Evangeline shook her head weakly. I am a mail-order bride. The coach left me behind." The cowboy crouched beside her, his hand gently steadying her elbow. "Name's Vaughn Mercer. You are out here alone?" She nodded once, then swayed. Vaughn caught her before she could fall. His arms were warm, strong, and he smelled faintly of leather and pine. "You are safe now. I promise." She blinked up at him, dazed, barely catching the way his jaw tightened with quiet resolve. Then the world tilted, and she fainted. When Evangeline opened her eyes again, she was under canvas, the sound of crackling fire, and the scent of beans and coffee in the air. She struggled to sit up. "You need to rest," Vaughn said from beside her, where he sat on a flat rock stirring a tin pot. "You were near heat stroke." Her voice was hoarse. "Where are we?" "My camp. About 15 miles east of my ranch. You passed it clean by somehow." Evangeline's hand fluttered to her chest. "Your ranch?" He nodded. "I run cattle out past the canyon ridge. Got a few hands in a small bunkhouse. No wife. No children." He looked at her then, long and steady. "You said you were a mail-order bride. Who were you supposed to marry?" Evangeline hesitated. "A man named Harold Pickett. He sent letters." I answered. Vaughn's brow furrowed. "Harold Pickett died this spring. Fever took him." "You never got word?" Her heart sank, the weight of the news crashing into her like a wave. "No. I had no idea." She looked down at her hands, dirt under her nails, the edge of her dress torn. "I sold everything I had," she whispered. "There is nowhere for me to go." Vaughn stood, poured her a tin cup of water, and handed it to her. His hand brushed hers warm, careful. "You are not alone. Not anymore." By the next morning, she could walk again. Vaughn let her ride his horse while he walked beside her, leading it by the reins. The sky was wide and endless above them, the wind soft through the grass. Evangeline watched him from the saddle. His hat shaded his face, but she could see the way his eyes scanned the horizon, always alert. He did not say much, but when he looked at her, it was like he saw her, not just as a burden, but as someone worth saving. "You live alone?" she asked after a while. "My younger brother died 2 winters ago. He and I built up the ranch together. Since then, it has been just me and the land." She nodded, quiet. "You? My father died in the war. My mother passed last year. I have no one left back east." She swallowed. "That is why I answered Harold's letter." Vaughn was silent for a few beats. Then he said, "You do now." She turned her head toward him, startled. But he just kept walking, the wind tugging at the ends of his coat. The ranch sat in a low valley, framed by cottonwoods and a winding creek. It was not grand, but it was solid. The barn was red, sun-faded, and the porch had a swing that creaked when she touched it. "I will sleep in the bunkhouse," Vaughn said as he helped her down from the horse. "You can take the house. You need clean clothes and rest. I will send one of the hands to town tomorrow for supplies." Evangeline tried to speak, but her voice caught. "I do not know how to thank you." He looked at her, his voice low. "You do not owe me anything. You were left out there to die. That should not have happened. Something passed between them, then quiet, sure. Days passed. She cooked while he worked the fence line. She mended shirts while he hauled hay. They ate dinners on the porch, the silence between them growing warmer instead of colder. One evening, he brought her a pair of boots that actually fit. I found them in the attic, he said. My brother's widow left them behind. You should not be walking around in those torn ones. Evangeline took them slowly. You keep doing things like this. He shrugged, a little awkward. You needed them. She stepped closer. No one has looked after me like this in a long time. Vaughn met her eyes. You do not have to be brave all the time. Her throat tightened. I do not know what I am to you, she said quietly. But I feel safe here. With you. His jaw shifted, like he was holding back something too big to say. I made you a promise, he said. And I meant it. A week later, a storm rolled in. Wind and rain lashed the valley, and the bunkhouse roof began to leak. Vaughn moved into the house for the night, soaked and grumbling. You will catch cold, she said, handing him a towel. He took it with a small smile. You always worry. I do. That night, lightning flashed in the windows. Evangeline sat up in bed, unable to sleep, her thoughts spinning. She stepped out quietly into the hallway and found Vaughn sitting in the kitchen, boots off, shirt damp, head in his hands. You could not sleep either, she said softly. He looked up, and his eyes were tired but warm. No. She crossed the room slowly, then sat beside him. I do not want to be just a burden to you, she said. You are not. I want to stay. His hand found hers on the table, gently curling over her fingers. Then stay, he said. With me. She looked up, met his eyes. Yes. He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers, and for a long moment, they just breathed. Neither of them needed to say the words yet. It was already there, something real, something growing. And for the first time in a long time, Evangeline knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The ridge behind the Mercer ranch held the morning light longer than the low valley, and when Evangeline stepped out onto the porch that first cool September morning, she saw the way it gilded the tops of the cottonwoods like a promise. The storm had passed, and with it, something between her and Vaughn had settled into place, not declared, not labeled, but present. She felt it in the quiet between them, in the way he now lingered before heading out, and how she found herself listening for the sound of his boots returning. He came in from the barn with his sleeves rolled, and his hair still damp from washing at the pump. There were 2 eggs in his hand and straw on his shoulder. Hen laid late, he said, setting the eggs in the chip bowl beside the stove. She's gone broody. Evangeline wiped her hands on her apron. We'll set her aside. Let her try. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her knead dough. You ever keep chickens before? I worked in a boarding house near Quincy for 2 years. Cooked for 17 men and 1 widow who never spoke. Chickens were easy compared to them. Vaughn chuckled low in his throat. 17 men? That's a war front. She glanced up. They never once said thank you. He stepped forward and picked up a stray curl that had fallen from her pinned hair, tucking it behind her ear with a rough gentleness. Then they were fools. She didn't answer, but her breath caught, and she set down the dough. Later that day, while he rode north to check on the west herd, Evangeline took a basket and walked down to the creek. The wild plums were ripe along the edge, their skins tart and red-black. She picked slowly, fingers stained, the hem of her skirt damp with dew where it brushed the undergrowth. Across the water, a mule deer lifted its head and stared at her for a long moment before vanishing into the trees. When she returned, Vaughn was already back, splitting wood behind the barn. His shirt was off, the muscles in his back working rhythmically, and she paused beside the porch, watching him a moment before calling out. I brought enough plums to make preserves. He leaned on the axe, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his arm. You always find a way to make things sweeter. She tilted her head. Was that meant to be something? His eyes met hers across the yard. Maybe. After supper, she boiled the plums down with sugar he'd brought back from the storehouse, the windows fogging with steam. Vaughn dried dishes while she stirred, the silence between them comfortable. Then he said, "There's a dance in Three Pines come Saturday. I don't usually go." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "But? They're short a fiddler. I used to play a bit, back when my brother was alive." They asked. She turned, wiping her hands. "Are you asking me to go with you?" He nodded once. "If you'd like. I would." He seemed relieved, though he only nodded again and picked up the next plate. The next days passed in quiet rhythm. She planted onions in the raised bed behind the shed while he repaired the south fence. At night she read from a weathered copy of Pilgrim's Progress she found under a loose floorboard, and he whittled by the fire, shaping a piece of cedar into something she couldn't yet make out. On Friday, as she was brushing out her hair, she heard the soft knock at her door. "I made something," Vaughn said, holding out a small wooden comb, smooth and polished. "Your old one's cracked." She took it with both hands. "It's beautiful. I wanted it to be." Her voice was quiet. "Thank you." He looked at her, the firelight catching the curve of his jaw. "You've changed this place." She stepped closer. "So have you." They didn't touch, but they stood close enough their breath mingled, and something unsaid passed between them again, not rushed, not demanded, just waiting. The night of the dance, she wore a dress she'd found in a trunk by the attic stairs. It was older, but clean, the stitching delicate. Vaughn saddled the wagon and helped her up, his hand lingering a moment longer on her waist than it needed to. Three Pines was little more than a church, a mercantile, and a few scattered homes, but tonight the whole town had gathered. Lanterns swung from the rafters of the Grange Hall, and the fiddle music spilled out into the dusk. Children darted between skirts, and the scent of fried dough and sawdust hung in the air. Vaughn took his place beside the other musicians, nodding to her once as he lifted the bow. She sat near the wall, hands folded, watching him play. He was good, better than he'd hinted, his foot tapping lightly, his eyes half closed with concentration. When the reel ended, he stepped down and offered her his hand. "Would you dance with me? I've not danced in years." He smiled, small and real. "Neither have I." They moved slow at first, cautious, then easier, as if their bodies remembered something their minds had forgotten. He held her steady, his hand warm at her back, and she let herself lean into him, just a little. "I never expected this," she said softly. He looked down at her. "Neither did I. But I'd not change it." The music swelled again, and they turned with it, the lantern light casting spinning shadows across the floor. It wasn't grand or fine, but it was theirs. And for the first time in years she felt like she belonged to something again. Not a contract. Not a duty. Just a life slowly, quietly being built. Together. The first frost came before the leaves turned, and the morning it settled over the pasture. Vaughn found Evangeline already outside, steam curling from her breath as she scattered feed to the hens. He paused at the door, watching her sleeves pushed up, her cheeks ruddy from the cold, the hem of her skirt damp with dew. She moved with quiet purpose now, not like someone passing through, but like someone who'd begun to root. He stepped off the porch and walked to where she stood, her hands dusted with cracked corn. "You're out early," he said. "The hens don't wait. Neither do the cows. Fence down again along the creek. I'll need to ride out and see how bad." She nodded, brushing her palms together. "Take biscuits with you. I left them wrapped in the tin." He hesitated, then said, "I could use another pair of eyes, if you're steady in the saddle." She looked up at him, squinting against the pale sun. "I can ride." They left before the sun cleared the ridge, Vaughn leading her along the narrow trail that wound through cottonwoods and low brush. The land was quiet, save for the distant cry of a hawk and the occasional rustle of something unseen in the undergrowth. The trail narrowed near the creek, forcing them to ride single file. Vaughn pulled up short at a fallen cottonwood that had crushed part of the old fence. He swung down, testing the splintered rail with a boot. "Storm must have weakened it," he said. "We'll need to reset the posts." Evangeline dismounted without needing to be asked. She knelt beside a broken segment, touching the grain. "You've used tamarack here. It splits easy when it's dry." He looked at her. "You know wood? My father was a cooper. I used to help him sort stave stock." Vaughn crouched beside her, nodding toward the brush. "There's a stand of fir not far. We'll cut from there next time." She glanced at him. "You trust me to help?" His answer was simple. "I do." They worked in tandem, clearing the debris. By midday, her gloves were stained, and a blister had opened on Vaughn's palm. "You're bleeding," she said, reaching for his hand. "It'll close." She took a clean strip of cloth from her coat pocket and wrapped it. "You should have asked." He didn't pull away. "You were already doing enough." She tied the knot tight, then looked at him, her eyes steady. "You don't have to carry everything alone." He met her gaze, something unspoken flickering there. "I've been doing it so long, I forget how not to." They rode back together with the sun behind them, their shadows long across the grass. That night, she boiled willow bark and laid a folded cloth over his hand. Vaughn sat still, watching her fingers work. "You were meant for more than trouble and disappointment." She didn't look up. "So were you." The next day, a letter came by courier from a neighboring rancher. Vaughn read it with a frown, then passed it across the table. "They're selling off land up near the ridge. Old widow can't keep it up. Wants it to go to someone who'll use it proper." Evangeline read the shaky script, then looked at him. "You're thinking of buying it?" "I'm thinking we could raise sheep on higher ground. It'd mean more work. More hands." He paused. "More permanence." She folded the letter slowly. "You've never talked like that before." "I didn't have reason to." He stood, moved to the window, then turned back. "If I do this, it won't just be for the land. I want to build something real." She rose, crossing the room until they stood only inches apart. "So do I." Vaughn reached out then, his hand warm against her cheek. "I've been waiting for the right time to say this, but I don't think there's any such thing." Her voice was a whisper. "Say what?" "That I want you here. Not just for a season, or because you were left behind. I want you beside me. In name, in truth." Evangeline's breath caught, but she didn't waver. "Then ask?" He did. He asked with no flourish, no ring, no kneeling. Just steady eyes and a voice that didn't shake. She answered with a nod, her hands in his, and something quiet and strong passed between them. They married the following week, under the cottonwoods near the creek, with only the ranch hands and the wind as witnesses. Vaughn wore his best coat, and Evangeline carried a sprig of dried sage. There was no sermon, just a few words from an old friend of Vaughn's who'd once served as justice of the peace. No one cried, but during the vows, Vaughn's thumb brushed against her hand and lingered. That night, as dusk fell and the fire crackled low, they sat on the porch side by side. The land around them was still, the hills dusky blue, and the first stars just beginning to show. "I never thought I'd end up here," she said quietly. "Neither did I." He reached for her hand, laced their fingers together. "But I'm glad we did," he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and together they watched the night settle, and no longer alone, no longer waiting. Just two people, stitched together by choice and time, with the land stretching wide before them and no reason now to look back. Late October brought a hush to the valley, the kind that settled deep in the bones. The hay was stacked, the cattle fed heavier, and the last of the wild flowers had gone brittle at their stems. Evangeline stood by the root cellar, her shawl drawn close, watching the way Vaughn stooped to load a barrel of salt pork onto the wagon. The morning was dry, cold enough that the air stung in her nose. He straightened, flexing his shoulder. "Jacob Parsons sent word. His eldest taken sick. They're low on meat." She nodded. Take apples too. I've put up more than we'll need through winter. He paused, one boot on the wagon's edge. You sure you'll be all right here? I've got the dog, the hens, and a kettle that won't sit still on the stove unless I watch it. I'll manage. Vaughn crossed to her, his gloved hand brushing her cheek for the briefest moment. Back by sundown, the wagon creaked off down the trail, and she stood watching until it disappeared around the elm grove. Inside, the house carried the quiet of lived in peace. She checked the sourdough by the stove, then moved to the rocker beside the hearth and opened the ledger Vaughn kept tucked in the drawer. She'd taken to helping with the ranch accounts, her pen steady, her mind always reaching toward order. It grounded her in a way she hadn't expected. She was halfway through tallying the bushels of feed bought last week when a knock came at the door. When she opened it, a woman stood on the step with wind-chapped cheeks and a worn carpetbag at her feet. Her coat was patched, her boots muddy. She looked to be in her mid-30s, but her eyes had a drawn, hollow look that spoke of too many hard miles. I'm looking for Vaughn Mercer, she said, voice nearly lost in the wind. Evangeline tightened her shawl. He's gone up to the parson's place. Might not be back till dusk. The woman hesitated, then said, I'll wait. Evangeline stepped aside. Come in then. You're cold. Once inside, the stranger stood stiff near the door, arms wrapped around herself. I'm Evangeline Mercer, she said gently. Vaughn's wife. That made the woman flinch almost imperceptibly, but Evangeline didn't miss it. After a long silence, the woman said, My name's Beatrice Lyle. Vaughn knew my brother years ago. I've come a long way. Evangeline nodded toward the hearth. Sit. I'll get you tea. They didn't speak again until the kettle whistled. Beatrice didn't touch her cup, only stared into the fire. My brother was named Caleb Lyle. He and Vaughn drove cattle together down near Helena, back before the war turned everything upside down. Caleb didn't last through it. Evangeline sat across from her. Vaughn's never spoken of him. Beatrice gave a slow nod. He wouldn't. Caleb got into something he shouldn't. Vaughn tried to pull him out of it. He nearly got himself killed over it. Outside, wind scratched against the window panes. I don't have any family left, Beatrice said at last. I did something wrong back in Missoula. I can't stay there. Evangeline studied her, the way her shoulders curled inward, like she hadn't rested in weeks. You're not asking for charity. No. Just a place to earn my keep. Evangeline stood. We've got room. There's feed sacks in the loft that need mending, and the root cellars in need of sorting. You'll have your own bed. You can stay till you decide your next step. Beatrice blinked. You don't even know me. I know what it is to have nowhere else. When Vaughn returned that evening, the sky already bruised with twilight, he saw the second candle burning in the front window and knew someone was inside. Beatrice stood as he entered, her hands clasped tight. He froze in the threshold, staring at her like a ghost had risen. Her voice caught. I'm not here to stir up what's gone. I just want a place to work. He turned to Evangeline, something unreadable in his expression. I told her she could stay a while, she said before he could ask. There's work enough, and winter's coming. He looked between them for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. All right. That night, after the dishes were washed and Beatrice had gone to the spare room, Vaughn stood beside the hearth, turning his hat in his hands. She was just a girl when I last saw her, he said slowly. Her brother put her through hell. I didn't know she'd survived it. Evangeline moved to stand beside him, resting her hand lightly on his forearm. You don't have to explain, she said. But if she brings old wounds, we'll face them together. He looked down at her, his voice rough. You don't flinch from much, do you? I flinch. I just don't run. He leaned his head against hers, the fire snapping behind them. Then we'll see this through. Together, he murmured. And in the hush between words, in the warmth of that shared certainty, the quiet strength of all they'd built pressed in around them like a shelter against the long winter ahead. The snow came slow that year, more hush than storm. By late November, the ground had firmed under a brittle white crust, and the wind found its way through every crack in the eaves. Inside the house, the hearth never went cold. Evangeline kept a kettle going most of the day, and Vaughn stacked wood in the lean-to until his shoulders ached. The land had gone still, but their days stayed full. Beatrice settled quiet into the rhythm. She took to the loft work with a steadiness that suited her, and when she spoke, it was usually about what needed doing next. She never asked for more than her share, but she never shrank from her part either. That counted with Vaughn. One morning, as Evangeline hung strips of venison to dry on hooks near the stove, Beatrice stepped into the kitchen with a folded piece of paper in her hand. "I've had word from a woman I used to know in Butte. She runs a laundry near the rail yard. Says she'll take me on, room above the shop." Evangeline turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "You've decided to go? I need to earn my own way. I've stayed longer than I meant to, and I don't want to wear out my welcome." Vaughn came in behind her, carrying 2 buckets of water. "You never did." Beatrice looked between them both. "Even so, I've got to try standing on my own feet again." Evangeline stepped forward. "You'll write, won't you?" "I will." Vaughn set the buckets down and pulled a small pouch from his coat. "There's coin in here. Not charity. Just a start." Beatrice touched it but didn't take it yet. "I can't promise I'll come back." "That's not what it's for," he said. "It's for getting where you need to go." She nodded, eyes shining, and took it. 2 days later, Vaughn hitched the wagon and drove her as far as the station at Deer Lodge. When he returned, his gloves were stiff with cold, and there was a silence to him that Evangeline didn't press. That night, he sat at the table long after supper, sharpening the handsaw with slow, deliberate strokes. Evangeline brought her sewing to the hearthside and waited. After a while, he set down the file. "She's stronger than I remembered." "She'll make it," Evangeline said gently. He looked at her, the firelight catching the quiet steadiness in his eyes. "So will we." The next weeks passed in a soft rhythm. They mended what needed mending and read by lantern light when the sun dipped early. Vaughn built a cradle from pine and set it in the corner by the window, though either of them spoke about why just yet. On the first clear day of December, they rode out to the ridge, where the land stretched wide and white. Vaughn had brought cedar branches to mark the boundary of the new parcel he'd bought. They stood together at the far edge, the wind tugging at their coats. "This'll be orchard ground come spring," he said. "We'll try apples first. Maybe plums?" Evangeline tucked a stray hair into her scarf. "I'll learn how to graft cuttings." He turned to her, his voice low. "You make everything grow." She reached for his hand, gloved and warm. "So do you." That night, as they lay beneath quilts stitched by hands long gone, Vaughn traced the curve of her shoulder where it met her neck. "I never thought peace would look like this." She smiled in the dark. "It isn't peace unless it's earned." He leaned in, and their foreheads touched, breath mingling. "I love you," he said simply. She held his face in her hands. "I've loved you since you walked out of the sun and found me." Winter deepened. The wind howled some nights, and the lanterns flickered, but the house held firm. Vaughn fixed the barn door where the hinge had rusted through, and Evangeline taught herself to knit by lamplight, her fingers clumsy but determined. On Christmas morning, she placed a wrapped bundle in his lap, 3 shirts, each stitched by hand, the buttons carved from antler. He handed her a small box with a brass latch. Inside lay a ring of pale gold, the band smooth, the stone a flecked green she'd never seen before. "It was my mother's," he said. "I wanted to wait until the right morning." She slipped it on without speaking, then kissed him slow, her hands at his jaw. In early March, the first crocus pushed up through the melt, a violet bloom against the gray. That same week, Evangeline leaned over the washbasin and steadied herself against a wave of dizziness. By the end of the month, they knew. Vaughn held her hand in the quiet of the bedroom, her fingers curled between his. "We'll make room for everything that comes." She nodded, eyes bright. "We already have." That spring, they planted trees along the edge of the new land, their roots wrapped in damp burlap and hope. Vaughn dug each hole by hand, and Evangeline tamped down the earth with her foot, her belly rounding beneath her shawl. By harvest, the orchard had taken root, and the house smelled of cider and wood smoke. The cradle stood ready, sunlight spilling across its curved sides each morning. On a clear night in late October, their daughter came into the world with a cry that made Vaughn's hands tremble and Evangeline's eyes fill. They named her Clara, after Vaughn's mother, and wrapped her in wool the color of new cream. After they'd settled her in the cradle, Vaughn sat beside Evangeline on the edge of the bed, brushing a curl from her damp temple. "You've given me more than I ever knew to hope for." She rested her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. "We gave it to each other." Outside, the wind rustled through the cottonwoods, their leaves gold and brittle, the season turning once more. Inside, the fire burned steady. The child slept, her breath soft and even. And in the warmth of that room, with hands clasped and hearts settled, they knew with a certainty that needed no words, this was their forever. Hard-earned, deeply rooted, and wholly theirs.